you can't be prepared for every single problem that may or may not come to your community, right?
Right.
And so, looking at that and looking at that we're walking into the uncertainty of the end of the year, the start of 2021, what are some of the biggest challenges that you think are kind of sitting right in front of our community? And they could be new ones that surface because of what's been happening, and it could be maybe other ones that have been accelerated because of the pandemic.
Yeah. If you don't mind, let me hit on a few.
Yeah.
And I want to start, though, with, I think, a pervasive problem across our community and probably communities all across this nation that is only being amplified as a result of what we've seen in 2020. And then maybe drill down to a few things that we're seeing that might be new that we've got to address. Do you remember a couple of years ago? I talk about my kids a lot, right? And if you remember a couple of years ago, I came into work and I shared with you all and then with the whole community about the day that Charlie, my youngest, comes in the house in tears after school because he went upstairs and he realized that Goldie, his goldfish, had died. Remember this?
I do remember this.
Well, we had, the goldfish funeral and flushed him down the toilet and sadly went about our day. Well, it wasn't until the very next day that Charlie got home from school and he saw that all of the fish in his fish tank were dead. And he looked at me and he said something so profound because it connects to community. He said, "Mom, Goldie wasn't a sick fish. There's something wrong with the water." And in that moment, I just had this realization that, my goodness, how in a community like Chattanooga, where we can be known as both the best place to live if you make $100,000 or more, can we also be known as one of the worst places in America for a child to grow up poor? How can we be a community where 4,000 babies will be born this year? 2,200 of them into economic insecurity. And that was before COVID, Stephen. And I think what really got to me was that 70% stay stuck in this generational cycle of poverty and stress. And we take a step back from that as a United Way, and we recognize these sweeping disparities in our community, these gaps between those who struggle every day and those who don't. And then we layer on top that we are a generous community. The problem is not philanthropy. We have 1,600 nonprofits, 1,300 churches that are working to respond to these needs. And so I think something we've got to think about in the days to come very clearly is what's in the water that's causing our community to be both the best and the worst, number one. And number two, what are we going to do about it? What is at the root that's driving this? Because we can't just approach our community with a way of saying, let's fix sick fish, right? Because then we're always going to have problems that are bubbling up. We have to get to the root of what's happening. So through this COVID pandemic, I believe that those disparities are just even, just a light has been shown on them and to a much greater degree. Prior to COVID, we had 43% of our neighbors working hard, sometimes 2 and 3 jobs, but struggling to meet basic needs. Like, how do I keep the lights on, put food on the table, pay for a phone, a cell phone, or internet service, for example. And now, post-COVID, I can only imagine what that looks like for so many of our families today. The disparities are greater. So I think the urgency to figure out how we use the momentum of this moment to figure out what's at the root. We've got to do that as a community. Meet basic needs, yes. Triage problems, yes, it's important, but we cannot miss the fact that we want to emerge from this in 5 years' time, having fixed what's at the root.